there is no stupid question except the one you didn't ask.
Welcome back to the Talking Sales series, and I've got Paul Watts with me. Hello, Paul.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm great, Paul. Look, previously we've had discussions on all that sorts of aspects of sales, and you've raised one thing that you think is absolutely critical to selling, and that's curiosity, having an attribute to be very curious. Tell me more about that. Let's share with the audience why you think that.
Well, to share why I think that, I have to go right back to the very start of my sales career. In fact, before my career had even started, I have to go back to my first sales interview. So, John, I worked in engineering before I moved into sales. And I was in engineering for nearly 7 years before I realized I didn't want to be an engineer. And one day I was sat in the lunchroom reading the newspaper, looking through job vacancies, thinking, what am I going to do with my life? When I saw an advertisement for a sales engineer. And I thought, sales, I could do that. So I applied for the job, and I researched the company. I prepared for the interview. I thought quite well. And I remember going to the interview, and it was a professional recruiter that the company had hired, who was a specialist in recruiting technical salespeople. So this recruiter was very familiar with the industry, and he was a very professional interviewer. And he was asking me all the questions that I'd actually prepared for. So I was feeling really good about the interview. And as we moved through the interview, towards the end of the interview, the questions changed into questions that you can't ask today, but they were about health. Now, of course, you're not allowed to ask those kinds of questions. You can't ask somebody how old they are or, how healthy they are. But back in those days, you could. So he moved into the health-related questions, and he asked me, did I smoke? And I said, no, I've never smoked. Do you take drugs? I said, no, never taken drugs. He said, do you drink? I said, well, I play rugby. And he said, okay, I'll put that down as yes. And then he's asking me if I'm in good shape, if I'm in good health. And I said, yeah, I'd like to think I'm in pretty good health, pretty good shape. And then he said, have you ever been bitten by a dog? And I thought, it's a strange question. But immediately, and my mind was trying to rationalize why he asked. And I'm thinking, well, in this business, in this job, I'm going to have to go to lots of different companies. Some of those environments are going to be quite harsh. And I'm wondering, does he want to know if I've got my tetanus shot? That's what I'm thinking. Because, if you got bit by a dog in the UK back in those days, first thing they would do is give you a tetanus shot. So I thought, that must be why he's asking. So I said, yeah, it was a few years ago, but yes, I have been bitten by a dog, but I have had my tetanus shots. And you've had your tetanus. And he's writing all this down. And then he says, so have you got any questions for me? And of course, the first question that's going through my head is, why did you want to know if I'd been bitten by a dog? But I didn't ask that. I went to the prepared questions that I'd taken into the interview, and I started asking those questions instead. And at the end of the interview, he said, okay, well, thank you for your time today. And he shook me by the hand and he sent me on my way. So all the journey home, all I can think about, John, is why did he ask me if I'd been bitten by a dog? It was really starting to bug me. And I got home and I remember my girlfriend said, so how did the interview go? And I said, I thought it went really well. And she's like, oh, right, okay. What questions did they ask? I said, well, actually, they asked all the questions I was expecting, except one. And she said, well, what question was that? And I said, they asked me if I'd ever been bitten by a dog. And she said, well, why did they ask you that? And I said, I don't know. Oh, shit. I realized at that point that I'd messed up. So I still had the guy's card, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to give him a call. So I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, hey, it's Paul Watts. You interviewed me earlier today. And he said, oh yeah, I remember. Did you forget something? And I said, I did actually. I said, during the interview, you asked me if I'd ever been bitten by a dog. Can I ask, why did you ask that? And there was a short silence, and then all I could hear was this belly laugh, this big belly laugh, really, really big laugh. And then he said, "Well, Paul, that was the curiosity test, and you failed it." So I thought for a few seconds, and then I said, "Did I?" And he went, "Well, yeah, you didn't ask why." And I said, "Am I not asking why now?" And he said, "You know what? That's a very good point." He said, "I'll tell you what, Paul, I'm going to give you half a mark for that." And then I said, "John, I go, half a mark? Surely it's worth 2 marks. I mean, how many people have ever called you back?" And he went, "You would be the first." He said, "You know what, Paul? You've sold me on it. I'm going to give you 2 marks, but you're still not getting the job." And then he went on to explain to me that they were looking for somebody who was an experienced sales engineer, and of course I was brand new, and they weren't looking to train somebody up. So I probably shouldn't have been interviewed in the first place, but he gave me a few pointers along the way. But what that taught me, John, was that there is no stupid question except the one you didn't ask. And I think curiosity is a superpower of sales. I genuinely believe that top performing salespeople are naturally curious, and that natural curiosity leads to more questions. It leads to better questions, more insightful questions that really help that salesperson to get to the root cause of their customers' challenges.
Look, I love the story, and you make a very, very good point. And one thing I'd say to people out there, I've seen a lot of people that are very good in a social environment where somebody says something around the dinner table, and they say, "Well, why are you asking that?" Or "Tell me more about that." And they go into a conversation, and they're in the moment in a social environment with their friends or associates. And yet some people move into a sales environment, and they're not in that moment anymore, right? And it's being in that moment, asking and being curious. When something's said, I need to know more about that. So you ask the questions, and you don't assume. So you were assuming, in the case of the dog biting, so you were assuming that he was asking that about, does he want to know that I've got my tetanus shot, right? So your assumption took you the wrong direction.
Right.
And assumptions are very dangerous.
Yes.
So don't assume you know why they asked the question. Actually ask it. And you're right. The only dumb question is the one you don't ask.
And I would say it's okay to make assumptions, but test them. I think it's important that you test those assumptions. So, hey, I'm assuming you're asking me this because you want to know if I've had my tetanus shot. Is that why you're asking? I think if you test the assumption you made, that's still curiosity, which would have driven the conversation in the path that they wanted. So I agree. It's a superpower of selling, John.
It is, and we all taught on how to ask open and closed questions and when to use an open and closed question. But the reality is, we're taught that from when we're 3-year-old, and sometimes we lose that ability when we come into sales. And the fact is, I'll say it as many times, that you need to learn how to be in the moment with your customer, to be engaged. And as soon as you're engaged, guess what happens? You start getting more curious and understanding that customer and asking the right questions. And it does take practice. It does take training. It does take all sorts of things to help you get to that point. But like you and I, we didn't prepare for these discussions. We've both got a certain amount of domain expertise, and we're having a conversation, and we're in the moment. You say something which triggers something in me, and I get curious and I come back to you. That's what I mean. And that's what sales is. Yes, you do your planning, but you put all that aside when you're now in front of the customer, and the planning will hold you in good stead as you are in the moment with the customer and being curious, asking the questions that your curiosity drives you to.
Completely agree.
Let's close on that, because I think that's a great discussion. Curiosity is, I agree with you. If you're not curious, get out of sales. It's got to be a primary attribute of a salesperson. So thank you for raising it.
Curiosity killed the cat, not the salesman. I'll leave you with that.
All the best, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, John.